This is Venusian Womb, a space for orienting to reality through the body,
where we explore how systems, culture, identity, and lived experience shape human perception.
And what it means to stay grounded, question deeply, listen honestly, and learn when to trust yourself, when to question yourself, and how to discern the difference. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venusian Womb Podcast, Season 2. And this is our episode 2. We are so excited to welcome our guest, Jenn. We're going to get into a little bit about her, but before we do, we want to share what we're going to be talking about today. So we've been weaving in our women circles and really just building this womb field, connecting with other sisters around the world and starting to pull at these similar threads of this work and how we are coming back to the body, coming back to the womb, coming back to ourselves, and doing that while we are in connection and co-creation together. And as we've been weaving this field with women, we've been noticing a lot of the ancestral threads within the tapestry of this womb field and how important it is to come back to our roots. So that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, is coming back, what it is to come back to our ancestral roots, and also what are the ways that we've ruptured and lost connection to our lineage and where we've come from, and where a lot of these practices and modalities that we use now that support us, especially in the Western world, where is their origin and how can we really truly honor the origin of this medicine? So we're going to be going into some topics of cultural and spiritual colonialization, what it means to reconnect to our roots and to live in the ancestral way, or in a way of that, in that nature, as much as we can within the modern world that we live in right now. So we're going to introduce our guest. Dun, 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 Jennifer. She is the beautiful founder of the Sisterhood of Mū, and that is how we've connected with her. And Megan, if there's anything you want to share about.
Of course, there's so much I could say about Jenn, but I also want to say I'm sure you guys have heard her before. She's been on our podcast. I think she was our first guest speaker or second guest speaker in season 1. And Jenn she speaks in codes. Like when she speaks, there is full body resonance that is felt throughout you might not understand what she's saying, but you will feel what she is saying. And it is pure magic and medicine, which is why it's such an honor to have her on our podcast for our season 2, to be talking about such an important topic that we also feel we have learned so much from her on, through her content, through the sisterhood, through what she's created. So if it's not obvious, we have a lot of love and admiration and just respect for who Jenn is and what she does in her medicine. But we'd love to send it to Jenn and let her add any more that she feels to complete the introduction of her service, her medicine, and who she is at this point in her life.
Hi, guys. That's a lot of pressure. Oh, man. Thank you so much for those wonderful words. And so just to let everyone know, I'm like 30 weeks pregnant today and I'm sleepy. So I might not be as eloquent sounding as before in the first podcast because of the exhaustion and creating a life inside my womb right now. But yeah, thank you so much. Sisterhood of Mū has been such a beautiful gathering place for multiple generations of women. With the maidens, the mothers, the crones, the wild women who are all in that circle. And it's just been such a beautiful learning experience for us to all co-collaborate and learn from each other. Learning from different experiences of different phases of womanhood. So yeah, I think just having this circle with both of you and all the other sisters who are in the Sisterhood of Mū has been really supportive, I think, for all of us, especially for me, growing up as an only child and finally having sisters I know and trust and know have the best intentions for other women out there, because we all know that the sister wound has been very, very loud for a lot of us. And I think through having this multi-generational circle, it's been very healing. I guess I would consider myself a facilitator slash mentor slash guide to women these days, helping them with, rebuilding their and reclaiming their fertility, their vitality, and just their holistic sovereignty. So that's where I'm at these days.
So juicy. Thank you so much, Jenn. And I also do want to say, I want to hype you up a little bit because Jenn's music is amazing. And I know that there's also been some creation going on within those realms. And so I just wanted to give you a shout out. And your collab with, I don't think I'm going to say this right, Hero Funk.
Yeah, Hierophant. Yeah, that's a thing. I've been in such a huge creation portal since the end of last year. And when I found out I was pregnant, I kind of just knew that I would take a break from facilitating and just be purely in creation mode, whether it's creating a life, creating music, creating codes that I can share on a bigger scale than because I usually do like one-to-one facilitating. So it feels really good to be in creation mode and just enjoying the process.
So much creative energy. And I'm going to ground us into our conversation and really just connecting to the ancestors in this conversation, connecting to your lineage, maybe connecting to your maternal lineage, your paternal lineage, whatever feels most accessible to you in this moment as we go through this conversation, and really just honoring all of the humans that have walked this land and have been native to this land before us. And yeah, just taking a moment of presence here as we go into a topic that I think is so incredibly beautiful and important, and it could also bring up a lot of shame and a lot of density and pain. And so I guess most importantly, we want to define what exactly, when we hear the phrase cultural and spiritual colonialization, what exactly does that mean? And how can we almost translate this in a way that most people can understand? And so I'm curious, Jenn, how you would translate that for people.
Yeah, spiritual cultural colonialization is taking away the authenticity of who the original people were. Philippines is where my heritage comes from. Mostly, it's been colonized for 400 years from Spain, and then we went into colonization with the United States. Then finally got our independence. But as a Filipino, and many Filipinos, I think, feel this, is we've lost so much of our original identity that it's been so hard to know who we truly are. And so many of us are on this huge search for our ancestors, what they did, where we came from. What is Filipino anyway? Filipino, it was, a colonial name given to us by King Philip of Spain. We were named after King Philip, Philippines. But, recently I've kind of found out through more literature, more research, and through people who have been excavating more of our original culture that the word Maharlika has been one of the original proposed names of the Philippines, which actually means the great creation, which is really beautiful. Yeah, so it comes from an origin of Sanskrit. So we know we have some origins from India. We have origins in Australasia, Polynesia. We're actually the ancestors of the Polynesians, which is what I recently found out. And so there's so many moving parts to who we are as a Filipino, because there's not just one race. There's many peoples who came before us, before me, there's thousands and thousands of generations. So to really pinpoint yourself as one place or one land, for me especially, is hard because we come from many lands. And the Philippine Islands, or Maharlikan Islands as I would see it today, would probably be like a meeting place of a lot of voyagers that came through, passed by, shared their culture, and then we kind of adopted it and inherited it. And it's made us who we are as modern day Filipinos these days. But we do have, our roots rooted in a lot of spiritual healing in the Mū doctrines. Lemuria, we have a lot of records of codes from Lemuria as well that are being recently found out now too, that modern day Filipinos will be like, what are you talking about? What's Lemuria? So there's the disconnect again of where do we actually come from? Where is our origin? So what is authentic to us? Because every Filipino is so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so interesting because, oftentimes we think of our origin and we think about where we're born or where we grew up in. And even just being an immigrant and then being immersed into a completely different culture than maybe the culture that your ancestors grew up. If those traditions are not passed down through your own lineage and the people within your family, then and you're not living within that culture, then you do there is this rupture that's formed, and we do lose those traditions, and we lose that cultural thread of music and art and just expression through, I guess, the energy of those lands. Really, like, I feel like there is almost this like energy that's encoded in certain hotspots in the world, and like you can really feel the ancestral energy within it, and just the culture is so alive. Whereas for myself, even growing up in Toronto, there's so many different cultures here. Like, it's such a mosaic of just international nuance, that I almost don't feel I feel disconnected from my own lineage and like my own roots. And it's been such a journey of just like becoming aware of the fact that there's disconnection first and foremost. And then within that, being able to then discern what's part of the culture that I've just grown up in, and then what's actually mine that I've chosen, that I've cultivated and curated in my own self and in my own family. So it's very interesting, I think, growing up here and not being from here, and then not feeling like I'm Latina, but then also not feeling like I'm Canadian, and then also not knowing what that means. And yeah, I feel like, especially growing up and like in this coming of age stage of maidenhood, that's a huge point of questioning when you're thinking about who am I? Who am I, and how am I choosing to show up? It's like you kind of have to take steps back, like go back into like how did the ancestors live? Like, how did my lineage, like how did they live? And then from there, I think that in connecting to that, then more codes come through. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the disconnection is very interesting to realize, like in this melting pot of cultures that we live in North America.
Yeah, and it's true because I can relate to that too, being born and raised in Canada and then going back to the Philippines was very like a shock to me. It was a culture shock because of the way that they're kind of like brought up in the Philippines versus how an American or Canadian Filipinos raised here. And then you go back and they tell you that you're not Filipino enough. And then you're here in Canada and then you don't feel Canadian because obviously you're brown, and you would think that the majority of people here are Western. And then the culture too is different because we still have our traditions from our Filipino families that we bring here, which is a lot of warmth and hospitability and just closeness and loudness. And then you meet with, some Western people who come over to your parties and they're like, this is really loud, And I'm like, well, that's how it is. We're a loud family. We're huge. We got like 100 plus people in our family. And so, contrasting maybe with my husband, who's more European, and who also grew up here. He came here when he was 5 from Poland. He has a very small family and they're quiet, um, but also very, colonized by many wars that happened through Poland. And so it's really hard to come back to your authenticity if you're not willing to be curious about who your ancestors are, what they did, and how they grew up. If we're just speaking on the terms of like being a facilitator or a medicine woman, or we're living in our purpose as we're doing right now, and we're only wanting to fixate on the healing part and not looking at the wounding part, not looking at the trauma that the generations before us have experienced, we can't come into like a full acceptance of who we are at our origin because we have to know what happened through those years that led to this point of I'm deciding to actually be the innovator of my lineage now. Yes, okay, maybe, my whole family hasn't been emotionally regulated, but what I'm doing now as a facilitator is emotional regulation because I know that I want to cut that tie to the trauma. And now I want to rejuvenate this lineage going further, my kids, my nephews, my nieces, and let them know that there is another possibility for this legacy of our lineage to continue on a different path. It doesn't have to be what we experienced in the past before. And it's just really beautiful to realize that there are options. There's a choice. You get to decide how you want your lineage and your legacy to move forward. And to have so much honor and respect and understanding of what our parents, our grandparents, their parents went through. I mean, we didn't live through World War I and II. Our grandparents did. My grandfather was in the army with the States fighting against Japan in World War II, and they had to pretend they were dead just so that they can survive. So there's so much trauma. Did they have time for emotional regulation with their kids? They were just trying to survive, you know? And so I can see it in my aunts and my uncles, my parents, that emotions wasn't the center of everything. It wasn't the priority of like regulating your nervous system, which is kind of what our generation is all about right now. And so it's like working through their pain and having to facilitate that and making sure we can move forward and not let that perpetuate,
Thank you. Yes. And that speaks to so much of this shift in generations as well. Like, that's such a big conversation. And I kind of want to just tie back to like how you like the authenticity piece you spoke to, because I think that's so important, especially thinking about my own experience of just feeling like a mutt, of like actually not knowing, because culture is just not something that my family has ever, there's no pride about it. We have no meals, we have no like things that have ever felt like, oh, I know I have some Ukrainian in me. And I would just, because I knew that my grandfather was from Ukraine, I would say I'm Ukrainian up until literally January, when I'm like, what am I really? Because I don't think it's just Ukrainian. And it's funny that we're having this conversation now, because I am mailing out my ancestry DNA. And I know that there's actually a lot of Scottish in me, which I've never claimed, or no one has ever even, I mean, they've said yes, but there's nothing of traditional ancestry, no wisdom about any of that that's been passed down in my family at all. And feeling so disconnected and ruptured relationally to my actual heritage, that there's been this like almost avoidance and just like, well, that's not me, because no one's ever really taught me anything about this. So like no, that's not the word either, but just like a non-interest almost until recently, of like, where do I really come from and who am I really? And this deep desire and longing to know and wanting to reconnect with those roots. But because no one else seems to care in my family, it feels like it's like not something I should care about. I've even had family members like, why do you care? I'm like, because I do. I want to know. And the shame of wanting to know where you come from, or it feels, and then makes so much sense to piece back into that authenticity of like who are you, your blueprint, like what is your blueprint, what is your origin, and how does that inform your service, your medicine, truly.
Yeah. And I love that you're curious about your heritage, because I kind of took the same path of, my modern day family didn't really know the deeper roots of where we come from in terms of DNA and stuff like that. And so I was really curious, because I've always had a calling to Polynesia and to, Hawaii and stuff like that, more so than I did to the actual lands of the Philippines. So I was questioning myself too. I'm like, how come I feel more connected to Polynesian lands than I do to my actual place where my parents and my grandparents came from? And I think a lot of it came from a lot of colonization, where my mom kind of refused to acknowledge her Filipino-ness, because when she came here when she was 11 to Canada, she had to adapt to the Western world and kind of be less Filipino. And it's never been a priority for her to teach me the language. She didn't want me to have an accent, and to I guess she didn't want me to be different. She wanted me to fit in, and it's funny, because one of my biggest harms is conformity. So, I just want to be authentic, originally me, just being in my own world and just being who I am. But it's very contrasted to how my mom feels about herself. And so having to kind of navigate that wounding from the mother, I took it upon myself to do my DNA test and found out that I have Tongan, which is like, oh, okay, well, there's a story of Polynesia, of why I'm so connected to the Polynesian Islands. And then I have Sardinia, I have Spain, I have Basque, I have Vietnam, I have, God knows, East Asia, I have, I don't know, Malaysia. There's so many things in my DNA, which made me realize we're not just one people. You know, we've come from so many nations, so many places. And the thing I don't like about nationalism or like countries, the borders, is that, you know, it changed so many times throughout the generations. Like, especially Eastern Europe has changed so much. The borders have changed many times. Poland has been many different countries before it became Poland again, you know? And so it's like, what is a country really? At their borders. The land belongs to us as people. No matter where you come from, you're here, you're born on earth, earth belongs to you. And so there's this like element of belonging where we're always trying to belong to a certain little tiny place on the globe. But why don't we reclaim our belonging of earth, right? I belong because I was born here. This is my place. This is my home. This earth is my home. And so this kind of possession of land, right, that everyone wants to claim, it's like, okay, I get it. There's certain people that were native to certain lands. But at the same time, if you're going to go to someone's land of the original people, make sure that you steward it the same way that they do. If you're going to go to Hawaii, for example, there's a lot of Kanaka Maoli who are natives to Hawaii that don't like foreigners because they go there and try to change everything up. And so just to respect, you know, the place and make sure that you're stewarding the land and make sure that you're leaving it better than you did before you got there. That's the most important thing, to respect, you know, the values, the cultures, the foundations of the place, and not to just change it, but to learn from it. What I learned from Hawaii was some of the hugest lessons in my life in terms of being so connected to Mother Earth, being connected to the spirit animals and to nature spirits and the elements. And what that brought me was this connection to the Philippines, where we also had this, the Anito. We would be in connection with the nature spirits, the ferns, the plants, the animals, the elements. They were all gods before Catholicism came in and claimed that you only believe in Jesus and God and this and that, Mary and all that. But then knowing that our original belief system was kind of like the Hawaiians, I'm like, there's a relationship here. It was just, we were stewarding Earth long before we were colonized, and we just forgot how to do it. And now we're remembering how to do that. And to bring it, you know, to some place like Canada, where it's majorly colonized and very Western and very disconnected from the land. Everyone's on their phones. AI, you know, like everything's synthetic over here. It's how do we bring that over here? How do we learn how to reconnect with this land that we were born on? Because I think all of us were born in Canada, right? Oh, you weren't born in Canada? Where were you born?
Born in Venezuela.
Oh, you were born in Venezuela, and then you came here when you were little?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's just like a divine dance with destiny in terms of that, like where we're born.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
it's I'm a child of Earth, right?
Exactly. So you bring whatever you remember originally, and you bring it here where you live now. Because no matter where you are in the world, you're stewarding Earth. That's the most important thing. So here, it's the First Nations people who are stewarding this land, and this is the land that they were born in originally, right? And so if you're native to this land because you're born here now, let's say, then it's really great to learn from the elders. How do we steward this land? How should we take care of this place? You know, and I got really curious. I had a relationship once with someone who was Anishinaabe, and he brought me to his auntie who was an elder, and we talked for so long, and she just said, you know, every race in this world is here for a reason. Everyone has a divine purpose. Us as First Nations people is to make sure that the earth is taken care of, the first people. And then, she went on to different races. The white man, she said, is about progress. And she's like, we can't hate them for progress. That was their purpose, But it's how do we reclaim our authenticity and not get lost in the conformity of what the progress, wants us to be. Do we have to keep up with the progress, or are we allowed to make a decision and stay original and decide what kind of life we want to live? We don't have to go into transhumanism and AI and all that stuff if we don't want to, but everything is a choice.
Well,
Right?
and even it's the right relationship with the progress. Are we
Yeah.
in the right relationship with what we're moving forward in? Is this reciprocal? Am I extracting, or are we in a balanced relationship?
I also just want to say, like, wow, first of all, we belong just by being born here on Earth, and Earth is our home. And I think that, like, there's also this whole, like, global climate change agenda as well. And it's just like, there is a lot of talk about how our Earth is changing and just the impact of how we're living in the ways that we're operating in the world right now. And even just with AI, like, AI is so great, like you said, for that progressive nature, to be able to make things more efficient and to have more access to information, which is useful. Yes. And it also is not actually in right relationship, because it does use certain natural resources for us to have that accessible to us. And it's one of these things where I feel like, when we lose sight of our actual home, because obviously AI serves a lot of Western culture in North America right now by the nature of how we live and how we are producing, just literally creating and consuming at the same rate, really. Um, and it's because of that there is this disconnection from our land. And being native, even just by having immigrated here from so young onto this land, I feel like that's also what's inspired so much of my own work in herbalism, which is, how do we come back into right relationship with our earth and actually take care of our home as Earth, as a planet, not as a country, for a country to have more resources than another country. Because then if we were to be in some type of trade or, conflict, then we have this resource of, right? Like, this is just such a segregated way and fragmented way of thinking about how we're living and stewarding this planet. And even just with this whole talk of potentially creating civilization on Mars and going to another planet, it's again, even that narrative is disconnecting us from this way. And this ultimately is the way that the ancestors lived, which was in right relationship with the elements, with all of the living beings on this earth, and everything that has just been provided to us by Mother Earth, which is home, food, shelter, like everything we could possibly need to thrive and to be able to sustain life. And so when we're thinking about life and thinking about creation and thinking about the next generation, this is where it really allows us to question, what is it to be in right relationship, and what can we learn from the elders, from our ancestors, even if you don't have like a direct relationship. I know for myself, like, all of my elders in my lineage have passed on, and there isn't this record keeping of their wisdom through storytelling or journaling, or, right, like some type of documentation of what they've lived. So it's been interesting, I think, even just reconnecting to like the ancestral way of being of cultures, like of certain lands, and how things were done there, and how we can kind of bring that back to where we are native to right now in the world, and like foster that stewardship of right relationship and how we're living. And so it's interesting, because yes, we can't like stop this whole AI movement that's happening right now in the world, but we also can start having these conversations and choosing, like making sure that we're choosing how we're operating in the world from a place of just awareness and choice.
Yeah. And I think I have to bring this back again to really being established in your sacral zone, in the feminine space, which is the first resource of every decision that you make, is trusting your intuition. And being in that right relationship also means having the ability to be able to discern between what feels right and what feels wrong, right? What feels good in the body and what doesn't. What feels good for also myself, but also for others. Being in right relationship, it has to start with you. It has to start with how you feel in your right relationship with yourself. Because if you're not, then how can you be in a relationship with anybody or with the planet, right? Like even the way that we use AI, there's so much inauthenticity going on with creating texts and content. It's not coming from the heart anymore. It's coming from a place of, I need to get this done. I need to be efficient and productive and get my stuff out there. So I'm going to use AI so it goes faster, right? At the same time, we're not realizing that if I'm feeling like I want to offer this and be in right relationship with this offering, but knowing that every time I process something through AI, it's heating up all the data centers in the world that's causing this climate change, that's causing the rains, torrential rains, that's causing the overheating. We've had hail here last week. I had buckets of hail in my backyard, torrential rain flooding on my street that never ever happened. In Hawaii, they had the Kona low, which was a huge flood that happened on many islands. They had earthquakes. Like everything is not in homeostasis right now on the planet. And that's because humans are also not in homeostasis. Homeostasis starts at your root, at your tailbone. And so if you're not grounded in homeostasis, then everything that's being mirrored to you is happening in not in homeostasis too. So it's how can I build this foundation of that stability, of that homeostasis, of this right relationship so that I can better decide how I want to choose to move in this world, how I can discern how I want to use certain technologies. Do I use AI? Sometimes. Not to create though. I don't use it to like write text. I used to, I'll be honest. But then when I was reading it, I'm like, this doesn't sound like me. So I stopped. And then also, when I learned about the impacts on the environment, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm not in a relationship. I'm not being in integrity. I'm not being authentic anymore. And so I chose to step back from that and just, question it with things I really needed to know that I didn't have, I didn't research. I researched, but didn't know enough about. So I'd go into AI, for example, gestational diabetes for pregnancy, which I have. So just getting the information so I can better equip myself and my baby. Okay, fine. But I try not to use it often because I know every time I process, something's happening somewhere else. You know what I mean? And so there is this guilt sometimes of picking up the phone and putting a prompt in and questioning. But then also there's this like piece of, okay, did I really need to ask that? Did I really need to use that? Or could I just have thought about it myself? Can I resource myself first before resourcing outside of myself? And that's another thing that colonization has kind of implemented in our psyche is I need to resource academia. I need to resource everything outside of myself but myself. My intuition, my own creativity, my own thought process, my own imagination. Why do I need to resource everything outside? Escapism. They want to build a civilization on Mars. Why? They want to leave Earth. This is where you belong. This is where you belong. They've been pitching everything to lengthen your lifetime because they don't want to decay. Guess what? We're human. We're organic beings. We're going to decay. Guys, death is inevitable. It's going to happen. You can't run away from it. Your ego death will happen psychologically. Your physical death will happen. Can you lengthen your lifespan? Sure. You can biohack as much as you want, but if you're not emotionally regulating, nervous system regulation, if you're not doing all that stuff, you're going to get a disease. So it's how do I, again, live in holistic homeostasis is making sure that everything in my life, physical, emotional, psychological, technological, energetic, is all coherent.
And I think there's so many little threads that could be pulled on. And you speak, Jen, and I'm like, oh, but I'm going to stay with the thread of discernment, of that embodied discernment of how much we seek outside of ourselves. Like how many in client sessions with clients, how many people are going to AI with, and Milena said this in the first episode, with a very human experience, expecting technology or this technology to translate or problem solve, when we're giving so much of our power, so much of ourselves to everyone, to people outside of ourselves, to medical systems, to anything, instead of centering and, like you said, that homeostasis and remembering and knowing that maybe, and because we're in this age of like very quick answers and synthesis and process, we expect such quick answers. We expect our bodies to give us an answer like this because that's what we're being fed and that's available to us all around. But that's not naturally how we would be able to learn to trust our discernment, trust ourselves, trust what remembering and knowing we have internally, if we're expecting it at the same speed as technological systems or systems outside of us. And it's a very weird little thing that's going on, but it's very, very real. And that's a big thing that a lot of people are wondering is like, how do I trust myself? How do I trust you? How do I trust this? What? And you seem to know over there. So like, I'm going to go listen to what you're saying because that seems like a good, complete thing. Yep. That resonates, I think. So because it resonates and I think, I'm going to run with it without really checking in. But does it really? Or did it just kind of synthesize something and make it feel complete? So, and that's what's regulating you. That's what's bringing you to homeostasis because there's a loop. And that also brings me to how uncomfortable people are with uncertainty, with the unknowing, with the I need to have all my answers so that I could feel regulated. But that's actually not life at all. And then which brings us even to that topic on death that you were speaking on. We are so uncomfortable with death. We like to avoid it. We don't like to talk about it. But it's such a natural part of our cycle, of the human cycle, of the humanness. And by avoiding that and not talking about it and not sitting with it or being with it, and especially because it's so unknown, we don't know. Well, there's unknown. There's unknown there. Everybody has their own beliefs. But yeah, so it's very interesting how the body responds and tries to make sense of everything that's going on.
Yeah, and I love that you speak into and speak into that because what I'm hearing more is urgency. And what patriarchy and colonialization has done is built a sense of urgency all the time. That there's a certain time that we have to do certain things. Oh my God, I'm gonna die, so I only have a certain amount of years to live. And so this takes us away from presence. It takes us away from the slowness of processing things because we're always rushing to get an answer right away or to get satisfaction right away or to just live right away because, oh my God, there's a deadline. But if you take away time, if we just took away the clocks, took away, having to answer to a certain date or deadline for a project or something, and we just lived our life in full presence of the moment that we're living in right now and enjoying it, it's like a big relief to my body just got chills when I did that. Just a big relief of being right there, right now, because no other time exists but right now. 5 minutes
And
ago
as you say that,
happened,
I
right?
want to invite everyone right now
Yeah.
to just take a deep breath.
Mhm.
Wherever you're listening to this episode, just notice your surroundings. Maybe you're closing your eyes. Maybe you're tuning into any colors, any felt sensation on your skin. And just be here for a breath.
Presence. And I wanted to say something about our ancestors is that they did not live the life of convenience that we live in right now. Like the pace of living that they experienced in their lifetime is definitely not as stimulating as what we what we're experiencing right now with all of this mass information and just like having an entire new metaverse. There's like a whole online universe that did not exist a few decades ago. And now having like this whole world of information and content and advertisements and just like so much stimulus. And having a lot of convenience. Like we can order something on Amazon and have it delivered to my house like same day or tomorrow morning by just pressing a button on my phone. Whereas they needed to like fetch buckets of water by a well to get drinking water to then like maybe boil so they can consume or use to bathe themselves. Like it was just such a slower and more presence inducing process than just having everything just conveniently done for us and available for us whenever we want. And I think that that's also, I actually heard something the other day that when you slow down, when you just allow yourself to just move slower, time ends up being richer. Like the present there's so much more richness in the present moment that it feels like time is moving slower. And there's just more experiencing within that same amount of time than if you're like in your head, pretty dissociated from your body and from the present experience and just like doing, like in that doing state. And I think it's a very beautiful practice and invitation as we're talking about embodied discernment and talking about, you know, feeling into, does this feel right? Does this feel like it's reciprocal? Does it feel like it's respectful? Does it feel like it's in right relationship with myself, honoring the people around me that are affected by my actions in this moment? And like, that's such it requires so much presence in the body to even be able to make that reflection, like have that moment of reflection and then noticing and listening. And it really does become just a way of operating and a way of being as you practice this more and you learn what are those cues for you. And like they'll evolve as you go through different seasons of life, I'm sure. And, you know, intuition also evolves along with you. But it's so beautiful, I think, to really just recognize the beauty and importance of slowness in such a fast-paced world as we're connecting back to this ancestral way and just bringing more presence into our everyday, bringing more choice in how we're showing up, bringing more intention also in honoring the origins of the things that we're doing. Like, you know, I think this came up for us actually when we were planning our retreat for Venusian Womb and we were doing a cacao ceremony. And it was one of those things where we were just like, where did this come from? Like, where did this come from? And what were the hands that led to this being used in a ceremony for these women right now? And it was just really honoring, taking that time and also recognizing, you know, where can we deepen our integrity? Where can we do more research about the things that we're doing and the things that we have that we're using to hold these spaces, and the importance of that. And it does take that time to do some research and to get curious and to ask questions and to have the humility of asking elders like, hey, what can you teach me about this? And I really don't know, and I want to do it well. And even, you know, as you're creating an experience for people too, where maybe you want to honor a modality or, you know, some traditions of a lineage that's not yours, being able to just speak to that and say like, you know, this is my first time and I really want to have respect and reverence for where this comes from. And just having that humility, I think, is such a great starting point for people that are wanting to reconnect back to their lineage and reconnect back to their ancestral roots and are maybe trying things for the first time as they explore what might be a new culture for them, even though it's the culture of their ancestry. And yeah, and just having that humility of knowing that like we're human, and as this process of coming into right relationship, it's going to be a little messy, but like it's okay. It's part of the process. And that messiness and that exploration and the not knowing and the unknown and the figuring out intuition, like all of that will lead you to that other side, which is feeling so much more embodied and more connected to where you come from. And I feel like the lands that we're born on, the lineage that we were born into, like this is all a beautiful dance with destiny where there really is divine orchestration as to why we were born on the lands that we were, why we have connection to the lineage that we do and the traditions and cultures of those lineages. And it's like, I personally feel that whenever you go back to your native land of where you were born, there are so many codes that will unlock and reveal themselves just by being on that land. And sometimes it's not something that we have to like seek. It's something that we can just put ourselves in the situations to receive the wisdom. Like, it really is also just that simple, and just going into it with openness and curiosity. But yeah, I guess this kind of brings us into how, like, when we do experience or notice that there is this rupture within our lineage, how can we start kind of reconnecting and reclaiming? What does this reclamation process look like for people?
Yeah, and like you were speaking into cacao ceremonies and, the saging and smudging and stuff, those are all like First Nation, Indigenous, Amazonian, South American things as well. You might not even be from South America and you're doing cacao ceremonies and you're saging and you're not First Nations, right? So it's like, is this from my lineage, or am I just kind of practicing what I've seen in the spiritual community because is it trendy or does it work? You know what I mean? But then that also takes away from, okay, well, in my own lineage, in the Philippines, instead of sage, we use guava leaves. We use rice, coconut, and not really cacao sometimes, maybe coffee sometimes. But it's not as, I guess, used as South Americans would use or Amazonian would use their medicines, which are very mainstream right now. And so it's, how can I fully be curious about my own lineage? Well, it's, who were my ancestors? So when I had to look back at my own ancestors, a lot of them were farmers, a lot of them were teachers, but the most, I think, connected to the land, if I were to look back at those, are farmers. And so my grandfather, his father, their family, they were all farmers. And so they would do certain medicinal things that I only remembered as a child because my grandfather would show me what they were. He would use a lot of rice. He would use a lot of coffee. He would use guava leaves, And so it's, maybe he wasn't a babaylan, like a healer, but he was very healthy in terms of like food wise. So it's what foods were healing. And so how can I use that in my ceremony? Are there certain aspects of the ceremony that I can infuse, guava leaves, rice, or certain things like that? Can I make it my own? Or am I replicating something from someone else that I have no connection to? Even if you're doing cacao ceremony, it is great to acknowledge where it comes from and stuff like that. But is there also something else that you can think of that you can intuitively feel when you're actually sitting within, knowing, okay, I'm going to be offering a certain space? Who are the people that are going to be there? What do they actually need? And what's coming through me right now intuitively will pop up just in your own knowing of what elements do I need to bring in here? Because we're automatically going to go to water, fire, all the elements, maybe sage, maybe cacao, maybe certain plant medicines. But is it because I've been told that? Or is it because that's what I'm actually feeling from what the space actually needs? And so I would say in the beginning, when I was facilitating group ceremonies, I would do the things that I already knew, which were, First Nations practices of smudging, and then doing cacao ceremony, I did that as well. But then later, as I kind of got to know my ancestors more, I brought in rice. And it was something that I didn't really know how to use yet because it was very new to me. But rice being there was very supportive. It was nourishing. It was nourishing for the space. Salt was another thing that was very nourishing for the space. I just did what I felt I needed to do, and it supported the people there. And so it's not sometimes, about what we're used to. It's how can I get curious and take a chance on something and see if this actually does something medicinal for this space and for myself. And I would always say to try it on yourself first, obviously, to see how it feels. and then implement it into a space. And that's the thing too, is always be in integrity with your medicine. If it's not doing anything for you, you can probably be sure it might not be doing what it needs to for someone else, because there's an energy transference. Or maybe it does, or maybe the medicine that you're using is useful for someone else, but are you using it appropriately? I don't know. And so it's just, again, it's coming into that feeling, that intuitiveness of, am I being in a practice that I created? Or am I being in a practice that I maybe saw and experimented with and learned and I actually like it? Cool, that's great too. Am I paying respect to the people who taught me that? Cool, that's fine too. But I would encourage trying to be in like the utmost authenticity of coming back to what feels original for you. And there's nothing wrong with using cacao and sage and all those things, but just make sure that you're in integrity with how the practice actually is, before actually putting it out there. Because we see a lot of new age content and you're like, what are you doing? That's not even protocol, and there's certain things that elders would always tell you is to follow a certain protocol. It's there for a reason, In the Philippines, when they're doing plant medicine, there's a certain protocol that they use as a ritual. One of them involves cutting a chicken and letting it bleed. Am I going to do that? No, because I don't like to cut chickens and let them bleed, That's just something I don't want to do, something that doesn't feel right to me, so I'm not going to do it. But in the Philippines, in certain ceremonial circles, they have to do that because that's their protocol. So I'm not going to go around in Canada, grab a chicken, cut its neck, and let it bleed on the floor, because I'm going to freak everybody out over here, and freak myself out because I don't like blood. I don't like killing animals. So that just doesn't feel authentic to me, even if I'm Filipino. You know what I mean? So it's use what feels right for you. And then what's really great about that is once you build that whole your own protocol, it's original to you, and you get to teach that, and you get to bring that into your legacy, into your lineage, and teach them what you created, and then allow these new generations to feel what feels right for them, and they get to create their own legacy, their own medicine, their own practices, their own rituals. And that's beautiful. Then we come into like unconformity and move into originality, authenticity, integrity, having the courage to be wrong. It's okay.
Be messy.
Be messy. That's part of the learning process. And when you have kids, it's going to be messy, but they learn eventually and they come into their own being, and it's beautiful because you're like, wow, you're such a cool person. And I wouldn't have done that, but the way that you thought about it, great. And that's, how each generation learns from each other. They innovate constantly. So that's
That feels like a full little like completion. Like we started authenticity and then we wrapped all the way back around. I want to take a moment to thank you, Jenn, so much for sharing your very real lived experience, your codes, all of it. It's been you teach me so much. I learn so much when I'm in connection with you. I even feel like I'm like, wow, so much to reflect on. And there's so many parts of me that come online. And I can't wait to talk about this after the episode too. But we have so much gratitude for taking time out of your day when you are a busy mama right now and you've got lots going on to be in this conversation with us. And I want to check, Milena, do you have anything else to add, share before we close off?
I am in awe and gratitude. And I feel like this is just also such a resonance in my body about this conversation. And I feel like this has also left me with so much reflection of, what does my own original blueprint look like to me? And I think that this ultimately is a question that I want to invite everyone that's listening to reflect on after this conversation, which is, what kind of ancestor do you hope to become? Like what is your footprint within your lineage? And I think that really is our legacy. Like, I think that it's just like, what's the impact that we're having in all of the generations that will come after us? And it's so beautiful to be able to go through this process of self-exploration and to discern and choose what it is that you're nurturing and infusing into your bloodline and teaching your children and teaching your communities. And that's really how we bring back culture and how we bring back this ancestral remembrance. So yeah, that's my invitation, is what kind of ancestor do you hope to become? And I hope that that leads them into a beautiful exploration. But yeah, thank you so much, Jen.
Yeah, you guys are so welcome. I hear your dog. It's so cute. I also wanted to offer something to you guys and to your whole community. So, Sister Amanda of Sisterhood of Mū and I did a 7-day summit called Whispers of Remembrance. That's exactly on the topic of what kind of ancestor do you want to be. So I'd love to offer that to you and your community for free. So I can send you guys the link to that summit. And everyone can access all the videos in there, all the integrations, all the meditations, and to just come into feeling that originality and connecting with your ancestors again. So, yeah, if you guys are interested,
Thank you.
I will send over that link.
Very interested.
Absolutely. Anything to receive whatever wisdom has come from your channel, because like, wow, codes and just resonance. And thank you so, so, so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, guys.
But we will see you when we see you.
If this conversation stirred something in you, stay with it a little longer. Notice what resonated. Notice what challenged you. Notice what your body knows, and notice what it may still be learning.
Discernment is rarely about arriving at certainty. More often, it is the practice of remaining curious, grounded, and willing to stay in relationship with the questions that matter. If you'd like to continue exploring with us, join our newsletter for reflections, resources, and deeper conversations inspired by each episode. You'll find everything linked in the show notes.
Until next time, may you continue learning when to trust yourself, when to question yourself, and how to discern the difference.